You are listening to The Reference Desk, the Wicomico Libraries podcast that connects you to your public library. Welcome to Wicomico County Libraries podcast, The Reference Desk, the podcast that connects you to your local library. This month, we're looking into some popular fairy tales, and we're going to delve into the origins of the stories themselves. A lot of old folk tales, some older than you think, have surprising origins. Disney, and before that, the Brothers Grimm popularized a squeaky clean version of many old stories that had been passed down orally from generation to generation all over Europe. The brothers spent years gathering versions of popular tales and then editing and changing them, making them more into a moral tale, if you will. While this has been great for companies who have adapted them into timeless movies that we grew up loving and quoting as kids, some could argue that by quote-unquote painting over the story, it's effectively destroyed the contributions of the culture that told the story to begin with. Something that's always fascinated me has been mythology and folktales. I've always seen these stories as a window into whatever geographic area they're from. There are many myths and folktales that have similar versions told across a lot of different countries and cultures, highlighting possible trade routes in ancient times, and they can also trace out in stories how civilizations moved and migrated. My favorite example of an ancient myth having an unexplained connection is the myth about the Big Dipper Constellation. Both the Greeks and the Romans, and also the Inuit people of northern Canada, these ancient peoples, wholly unconnected to each other, at least so we think, looked up into the heavens, saw this constellation, and thought, yeah, that's totally a bear. And I find this absolutely fascinating. The Pleiades Constellation also has several myths associated with it throughout the world, where it's seen as a group of dancers, usually a set of 6 or 7 sisters. Why 6 or 7, you may ask? Because the 7th star in the constellation is very faint. The stories sometimes don't even incorporate the 7th one because not everyone can see it. In fact, the Pleiades Constellation was used as one of the oldest eye exams in history in the Roman army. If you couldn't see the 7th sister of the Pleiades, you couldn't be an archer in the imperial army. Let's look at 2 popular stories. We'll start by summarizing the original version, and then we'll look at what's changed and a little into the culture of the original story, in the hopes that we can come to a more broad understanding of the world in both past and present. La Belle et la Bête by Gabrielle Suzanne de Villeneuve. It was published in 1740. In this original version, the beast was portrayed as stupid and suffered from more than just a change in his appearance. Villeneuve also gave far more extensive backstories for the main characters. Beast was a young prince who was left in the care of an evil fairy. When said evil fairy tried to seduce him, he refused and was cursed, transforming into a beast. Belle in this story was not actually a merchant's or wacky inventor's daughter. Instead, she was the daughter of a king and a good fairy. The wicked fairy, maybe the same one who cursed the beast, tried to murder the young princess, and consequently Belle was put into the care of a merchant who claimed her as his own daughter in order to protect her. The version of the story that the company, run by a rodent, used as inspiration was published about a decade later. The seduction and an attempted murder was gone, and the author, Jean-Marie Le Prince de Beaumont, used the unrefinished tale to reflect social and political changes going on in France at the time. Like, the collapse of the monarchy and the vast disparity of wealth and power. The aforementioned Rodomont Company version was released in 1991 on VHS. You remember those? For those of you unfamiliar with the story, the Belle is the daughter of an eccentric inventor in a small town in France. She wants adventure and feels stuck in a provincial town. She finds escape through books, which causes her to be seen as an oddity around town. There's an arrogant jock type, Gaston, who sees her as a prize to be won and is baffled by her continued refusals of his advances. Belle's father gets lost on a journey, and Belle sets out to find him, only to find out that he's been captured by a mysterious creature. She offers herself in place of her father. The trade's accepted, and she begins her time as a prisoner of the Beast. Through her time getting to know him, she learns to respect him for himself, rather than fear of his monstrous appearance. Eventually, she admits she's fallen in love with him, breaks the spell, and returns into his human form, happily ever after. There is speculation that the original inspiration for Villeneuve's La Belle et la Bête goes back even further, drawing on the story of Cupid and Psyche. This Greco-Roman myth from the 2nd century CE tells a similar story of self-sacrifice, trials, and betrayal, culminating in a happy ending for the lovers. Other cultures around the world have similar stories. Sometimes the beast is replaced with a snake, as in India's tale, The Woman Who Married a Snake, said to have been recorded around 500 CE. The Indo-European connection could be why the Russian version of this tale, The Enchanted Tsarevich, and the Chinese tale, The Fairy Serpent, also retain the snake element rather than a beast. In Western Europe, the tale changes and evolves to refer to the beast as resembling a variety of animals. In an English tale, the beast is described as a small-toothed dog. In Denmark, the story is called Beauty and the Horse. The Swiss call it The Bear Prince. Finally, the Italian story Zelinda and the Monster features a fire-breathing dragon. A common theme in all these stories is unrewarded envy and learning to love what might at first appear as a beast, as colloquially known as don't judge a book by its cover. The next tale I'll mention is the classic Cinderella. You may be aware of the story as Disney portrays it in their animated film from 1950. In Grimm's version, Cinderella is an orphan who is cruelly abused by her stepmother. She wishes to go to the festival, which is actually 3 nights of partying. With the help of her fairy godmother, she is granted a gown and a carriage to go, with strict instructions to be home by midnight. The first 2 nights, Cinderella gets home without any issue, but she stumbles on her escape from the palace on the 3rd night, losing her golden slipper. Yes, golden, not glass. The prince, who was besotted already with the beautiful stranger who showed up at his parties, decides that he must find her and searches the countryside for the maiden who fits the slipper. Things get a little gory for the stepsisters, and if you want to know how all that goes down, feel free to check it out for yourself. Ultimately, Cinderella gets to try on the slipper, which of course fits, and they live happily ever after. You may be aware that the story as we know it in the Western world originated in France. Before Charles Perrault popularized the story of the poor Cinder girl in the 1600s, many separate cultures had their own version of the rags to riches tale. China's tale of Yeshen is one of them. First written during the Tang Dynasty from 618, that was from 618 to 907 CE. The story starts off with a young girl, Yeshen, who lives as a cave dweller with her father. In this time, it was common for a man to have multiple wives, and Yeshen's father was no different. Each wife bore a daughter, but soon after, Yeshen's mother takes ill and dies, leaving her in the care of her stepmother upon the death of her father soon after. Growing up as an orphan, the girl was kind, clever, and of course, beautiful, described as pale of skin and eyes like dark pools. In contrast, her stepsister is plain, and the stepmother soon grows jealous of her stepdaughter's looks. In typical evil stepmother fashion, she mistreats and neglects our heroine, providing a childhood of misery and loneliness. Her only friend is a fish. Yeshen catches, and she keeps it in the pool near her house. She visits every day, and the little fish becomes her only friend. Even though her stepmother gives the girl very little food, Yeshen always saves some food to give to the fish, which soon grows to an enormous size. They meet at the pool every day, and the fish comes to the bank when he sees her approach. Sometime later, the stepmother finds out about the fish. She is furious that the girl has hidden a secret from her. Most likely she's just bitter that, despite her best efforts, Yeshen has found some modicum of happiness. She proceeds to the pool herself in order to search for this fish pet. Wisely, the pet stays hidden deep within the pool, and it frustrates the woman. Not to be denied, she comes up with a clever plan. Sending Yeshen out on an errand, she demands that the girl leave her coat behind, claiming that it's hardly needed on such a warm day. Donning the coat, the stepmother goes to the pool. This time the fish, seeing a familiar coat of his friend, heaves himself to the bank expecting food and friendly conversation as always. Stepmother, having hidden a dagger in her sleeve, soon kills the fish, wraps it in the coat, and takes it home for dinner. Upon discovering her friend's demise, Yeshen collapsed onto the bank of the pool and wept. Very dramatic. Well done, lady. As she is weeping, she hears a voice exclaiming, "Oh, poor child." Understandably startled, she looks up to see an old man looking down at her, wearing the coarsest of clothes and had long hair unbound. She respectfully asks who he is, but he hedges the question, stating that he is there to tell her about the wondrous powers of her fish. Yeshen laments that the fish is gone, only to be corrected by the old sage, who informs her that not only is her fish alive, but that all of her sorrow that she's experienced today was her stepmother's fault. He goes on to inform her that the bones of her fish contain a powerful spirit, and that any time she is in dire need, she only has to kneel before the bones, speak her desire, and she'll have what she needs. He leaves her with a warning to be careful not to waste the gifts of the spirit. Yeshen proceeds to the midden heap, where they threw all their garbage, to gather the remains of her dear friend. Time goes on, and Yeshen continues to live a life of neglect and misery. She is also terrified that her stepmother will discover her secret, the magic bones in her bedroom, and she'll take even the bones away from her. Springtime comes, and the festival time is approaching. Now, this festival in these areas were known as times when women and men would meet and decide if they want to marry, and Yeshen longed to go, but stepmother had other plans. She couldn't stomach the thought of beautiful Yeshen outshining her plain daughter. How could her own daughter ever find a match if she had to be compared to her sister? So when the day of the festival finally arrives, stepmother orders Yeshen to stay behind and make sure nobody steals from the orchard while they were gone. As soon as her relations left, Yeshen went to the bones of her friends, saying how much she longed to go to the festival, and she would go too if she had anything other than these rags to go in. No sooner had she said this than a gown of azure blue and a cloak of kingfisher feathers appeared on her. But what Cinderella's story would be complete without magic shoes? The slippers were woven with gold threads in a pattern like the scales of a fish, and the soles were solid gold. You'd think that they'd be quite heavy with solid gold soles, but let's not forget these are magic shoes. Of course they felt light as air. As she left, the spirit of the bones admonished her not to lose the shoes, and Yeshen promised to be careful. Upon arriving at the feast, heads were turned by the young woman in such unique clothing. The stepsister, when she saw Yeshen, turned to her mother and commented, "This girl looks a lot like my sister Yeshen, doesn't it?" Hearing the girl say this, Yeshen of course promptly runs off before either one could get a good look at her. On her way home, she raced down the mountainside, losing one of the slippers in the process. As soon as the shoes left her foot, the magic clothes returned to her usual rags, with the exception of the other slipper, which remained the same. Hurrying to the bones, she was devastated to find them silent. She rushed to hide the gold slipper in her bedstraw and promised herself that she would find its mate. Meanwhile, out on the mountainside, a villager found the gold slipper, and seeing that it had value, it is solid gold, sold it to a merchant who in turn presented the shoe to the king of an island kingdom nearby. Of course, the king was entranced by the shoe, and he vows to find the owner. The search of all the young ladies in his kingdom commences. When his island turned up nothing, he ordered the search widened to include all the women from the neighboring villages, one of which, of course, is the home of Yeshen. A pavilion is set up in the town square, and all day every woman tries to fit into the naturally tiny slipper. Under the blackest part of the night, Yeshen, who was of course forbidden to go by her stepmother, sneaks up to the pavilion to see if the slipper is the one she lost. While Yeshen's only thought was returning the shoe to her friend's spirit, the king was struck by her beauty, and seeing her tiny feet, he allowed her to leave with the slipper. Naturally, he had her followed by his soldiers. No sooner had she hidden the slipper with its mate than there was a pounding on the door. Opening the door and finding the king standing there, Yeshen was terrified, until in a gentle voice he asked her to try on the slippers. When she put the shoes on, her clothes were instantly transformed into the same blue gown and the same feather cloak. The king, of course, decides that she is his true love. Not long after, the king and Yeshen were married. Fate, however, was not done with stepmother and stepsister. They were denied entry to the palace thanks to their cruel treatment of the now queen, and it is said were eventually crushed to death in a shower of flying stones when their cave home collapses. The magic shoes and the king or prince's search for their owner is a common theme in the stories. There's also an almost universal story of a childhood where the Cinderella character is an orphan and at the mercy of an evil stepmother. These themes are present in stories from so many cultures, from India to Britain, and of course, just as we heard, China. The idea that, while life can seem pretty rotten at the moment, there's always hope that fortunes will change, with a positive outlook and kindness to others, and it helps to have magical fish bones and shoes made of gold. Thanks for joining us today for our story time looking at a few of the fairy tales that have shaped both ancient and modern society. Join us next month to hear all about the exciting events you can expect to experience in Wicomico County Library's Summer Reading 2022 program. Until next time, this is Vicky, signing off. Future episodes may feature a variety of topics, ranging from storytelling, arts and crafts, reader's advisory, reference questions, discussion, and more. We also encourage feedback through our Facebook page or in the comment section on the podcast. Visit us online at www.wicomicolibraries.org. Search for Wicomico Libraries on your favorite podcasting site. You can call us at 410-546-5397, or you can email us at center@wicomico.org. That is CENTRE @wicomico.org.